Pacific Theater, 1942. The sun bled across the horizon as American pilots climbed into their cockpits, knowing what awaited them above the clouds. The whisper of death carried on a rising engine note. The Mitsubishi A6M0 ruled the skies, light, agile, and unnervingly precise. It could turn inside any Allied fighter. The Zero was a dancer with knives, deadly, elegant, and merciless. Every after-action report from the Solomon Islands sounded the same. Zero came from the sun, we couldn't shake them. Even the new P-38 Lightning, America's twin-engine marvel, couldn't keep up in a turning fight. The P-38 could climb fast, dive faster, and shoot straight, but once a Zero got behind it, the pilot's fate was sealed. In hangars across the Pacific, frustration hung heavier than the humid air. Mechanics worked through the night, patching holes and scraping blood from cockpits. Pilots blamed the aircraft. Engineers blamed physics. Command blamed no one, because they had no answers. At a small airstrip in Port Moresby, one mechanic refused to accept that. Sergeant Walter Walt Brooks, a quiet man from Ohio, had been fixing machines since he was 12. He wasn't a pilot, but he understood motion, how a machine felt when it fought against itself. While others saw perfection in the P-38's design, Brooks saw resistance, in the cables, in the control rods, in the way the yoke hesitated before obeying. He listened to the pilots complain, "It's too damn heavy. The controls lag, by the time you pull, the Zero's already behind you." That night, while others slept, Brooks stood under a dim bulb, staring at the Lightning's control system. Wires, pulleys, levers. Somewhere in that maze, he thought, was the reason their men were dying, and somewhere in that tangle of steel, he was about to find a solution that would change the war in the Pacific forever. The next morning, the jungle heat clung to the airfield like a wet blanket. Engines roared, hammers clanged, and men cursed as they worked to get the P-38s ready for another mission. But in one corner of the maintenance hangar, Sergeant Walt Brooks was lost in thought. He had spent half the night tracing every cable from the yoke to the tail. The P-38's control system was a marvel of engineering, but also its curse. The long twin booms, while elegant, created tension in the control lines. The further the pilot pulled, the more resistance built up. It wasn't a flaw, it was physics. But Brooks didn't care about what was impossible. He wanted the stick to respond instantly, no lag. No drag, no hesitation. When Lieutenant Harris, one of the squadron's best pilots, walked by, Brooks stopped him. "Sir, when you pull the stick hard left, what do you feel?" "Feels like I'm dragging a truck," Harris said, wiping sweat from his face. "You move first, then the plane listens. A Zero doesn't do that. It moves with the pilot." That sentence stuck in Brooks' head like a nail. It moves with the pilot. By evening, he had an idea so simple it sounded stupid, even to him. If the cables were binding from tension, what if they were given a little help? He found a length of piano wire from a broken radio antenna. Flexible, strong, springy. He coiled it around part of the control linkage, fastening it with improvised clamps. His theory was wild, that the spring tension might preload the controls, keeping them under constant pressure and reducing lag when the pilot moved. The other mechanics laughed when they saw it. "You gonna fix her with guitar strings, Brooks?" One joked. "Go ahead," Brooks muttered, "but when it works, you'll all want one." That night, he told the pilot, "Just a test flight. Don't pull too hard." The next morning, the Lightning with the wire trick roared down the strip and lifted into the sky. No one expected what happened next. Lieutenant Harris climbed into the cockpit just after dawn. The air shimmered with heat rising from the runway, and the P-38 sat gleaming, its twin booms catching the early sun. Mechanics watched silently. Even the jokers from last night were quiet now. Brooks stood by the nose, wiping his hands nervously on an oily rag. "All right, Sergeant," Harris said, settling his goggles. "Let's see what your miracle wire can do." The engines roared to life, twin props carving spirals into the humid air. The lightning thundered down the strip and lifted gracefully skyward. It climbed fast, faster than usual, then banked into a wide turn over the trees. At first, it looked like an ordinary test. But then Harris rolled hard to the left, pulled into a sharp climb, and the P-38 pivoted like it was alive. The whole hangar gasped. Normally, a move that tight would make the control surfaces strain and flex, but now the plane responded instantly, like it had been waiting for the pilot's thoughts before he moved. Holy hell! Brooks whispered, up above. Harris laughed over the radio. She's not fighting me anymore. It's like she wants to turn. He dove, rolled, and climbed again, each maneuver cleaner than the last. The mechanic stared as the silver lightning danced through the sky, something no P-38 had ever done before. When Harris landed, he was grinning like a madman. Brooks, he said, pulling off his helmet, I don't know what you did, but it works. That wire, it's like magic. Brooks shrugged, pretending to be calm. Not magic. Just tension management. That afternoon, the squadron commander ordered every mechanic to look at Brooks' modification. Some called it luck, others called it reckless. But by evening, for more planes had the wire trick installed, none of them knew that soon, over the South Pacific, this stupid idea would save dozens of lives and turn the tide of air battles against the Zero. 3 days later, the modified P-38s got their first real test. The 39th Fighter Squadron was ordered to escort a group of B-25 bombers heading toward Rabaul, a stronghold bristling with anti-aircraft guns and Zero patrols. The men were tense. Every mission to Rabaul meant loss. Harris and 3 other pilots took off at dawn, their wired lightning slicing through the humid morning air. Brooks stood on the tarmac, shading his eyes, heart pounding. He didn't know if his trick would survive a real fight. The formation crossed into enemy territory at 12,000 feet. Within minutes, the sky filled with streaks of silver, Zeros diving out of the sun. The old dread returned. But this time, something was different. When Harris broke left, the P-38 turned sharper than ever before. The Zero overshot, its pilot stunned. Harris snapped the throttle, looped, and came down on the Japanese fighter's tail, a maneuver no P-38 had ever pulled off before. The .50 cals thundered. The Zero burst into flames, radio chatter exploded. What the hell was that, Harris? Guess she learned how to dance, Harris replied, breathless. The other pilots began to try the same maneuvers. For the first time, they were matching the Zeros turn for turn, sometimes even tighter. The Japanese formation broke apart, confused, disoriented. They had expected sluggish American planes, not predators. When the squadron returned, the airfield erupted. Brooks didn't cheer. He just stared at the smoke-streaked P-38s, each one scarred but alive. That night, the commander called him into the mess tent. You saved pilots today, Brooks. Whatever that wire trick is, it stays. You just rewrote the P-38's manual. Brooks said nothing. He just nodded and lit a cigarette. For the first time since the war began, he felt something rare, hope. By early May 1943, word of the Lightning's strange new agility spread across the Pacific. Japanese pilots returning from combat were reporting the impossible, American twin-engine fighters turning like Zeros. At first, Imperial headquarters dismissed the claims. No heavy aircraft could outmaneuver Japan's finest creation. It defied logic, but the reports kept coming. One by one, surviving Zero pilots described the same nightmare, P-38s rolling faster, turning tighter, and recovering from dives with impossible precision. Tokyo's analysts grew alarmed. Something had changed, At Rabaul, a captured gun camera from a downed B-25 showed a P-38 weaving through tracer fire like a knife through smoke. The Imperial Navy's engineers replayed the footage frame by frame. The Lightning's control surfaces moved with unnatural speed, too smooth, too synchronized. They suspected hydraulics, even experimental gyroscopes, but the truth wasn't technology. It was a single piece of piano wire in a dusty hangar. Meanwhile, on the Allied base at Port Moresby, the mood had shifted. Pilots who once feared every encounter now looked forward to the fight. Harris led mission after mission, each one proving the same point: the Lightning could finally dance with death. Brooks had become a local legend. Mechanics from other squadrons arrived to study his modification. Some brought cameras, others notebooks. The airfield buzzed with rumors that Washington would soon send inspectors to test the Brooks mod. But Walt himself avoided attention. He didn't want promotion or medals, only to see his planes come home. Still, something about all the excitement unsettled him. If every base adopted the trick, someone in Tokyo would notice, and when the enemy noticed, they would adapt. He stared at the sunset that evening, engines rumbling in the distance. "They'll figure it out," he muttered. "They always do." He didn't know how right he was. By June 1943, the Imperial Japanese Navy was desperate to understand why their once invincible Zeros were suddenly losing dogfights. At Rabaul and Truk, engineers tore apart captured P-38 wrecks, searching for hidden hydraulics, secret boosters, anything that could explain the Americans' newfound agility. They found nothing unusual. No new alloys. No mystery parts. Just wire, bolts, and grease. Still, frontline pilots were under orders: adapt or die. New tactics were issued from Tokyo: attack from above, dive once, disengage immediately. The days of circling duels were over. The Zero's advantage in turn rate meant nothing if the P-38 could follow it through every roll, but the Americans had already adapted faster than expected. The Brooks wire mod had spread across squadrons like wildfire. Every Lightning in the theater now responded like a living thing. Pilots trained relentlessly, learning to exploit the newfound control precision. They called it the snap turn. On June 18, over the Solomon Sea, a formation of 9 P-38s met 15 Zeros. The battle lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, 5 Japanese fighters burned in the waves. Not one Lightning was lost. At Rabaul, intelligence officers replayed the radio logs. Japanese pilots sounded panicked. One transmission, recovered from a crashed Zero, said, "They turn faster now." Impossible. Americans should not turn like this. Meanwhile, Brooks was unaware of the growing storm his invention had caused. He still worked in the same hangar, sleeves rolled up, fixing oil leaks and shot-up fuselages. Every pilot who returned alive thanked him. He only nodded. "Don't thank me," he'd say. "Thank that stupid wire." But late one evening, a telegram arrived from headquarters. It carried the official seal of the U.S. Army Air Forces. It read, "Sergeant Brooks. Report to Australia. Immediate. Top priority." He folded the message quietly. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about a wire anymore. When Walt Brooks stepped off the transport plane in Townsville, Australia, he felt small. The airfield stretched endlessly, filled with spotless hangars and polished uniforms, a world far removed from his muddy post in Port Moresby. A captain approached him on the runway. "Sergeant Brooks. You're the one with the wire trick?" Walt nodded. "That's what they tell me." "Follow me, Sergeant. The engineers are waiting. General Arnold wants your report by Friday." Inside a hangar stood a P-38 stripped to its bones. Around it, men in white coats examined every bolt and cable. When Brooks explained his modification, a coil of wire wrapped to preload the control lines, they stared at him like he'd spoken nonsense. "So you just added tension?" one asked. "Pretty much," Walt replied. "Plane was thinking too slow. I made it think faster." Silence. Then Colonel Peters, head of flight mechanics, leaned forward. "You solved a 2-year problem, Sergeant. We called it control lag. You fixed it with a radio wire." Brooks frowned. "Didn't fix anything. Just kept my boys alive." But the data told another story. Tests showed his trick reduced input delay by 30%, enough to let pilots outturn a zero. Engineers drew up diagrams, papers, and memos for Washington. They wanted prototypes, factory retrofits, and an official name. Walt didn't care. He only asked one thing: don't let the paperwork slow it down. That night, he looked at the stars and thought of the squadron still fighting back home. His invention was leaving his hands and entering history. He only hoped the war would end before anyone else had to die proving it worked. By late June 1943, the U.S. Army Air Forces had a new secret, one born not in a lab, but in a mechanic's hands. Brooks's wire tension modification was classified under a technical code, Control Enhancement No. 47A. Only a handful of officers even knew it came from a sergeant in the field. Factories in California and Texas received coded instructions to integrate the adjustment into new P-38s. Engineers called it a micro-tension assist system. Pilots just called it a miracle. In Port Moresby, the first factory-modified planes began arriving. The men noticed it instantly: smoother controls, tighter turns, faster recovery. The Lightning finally felt alive. Even the veterans who once hated the aircraft now praised it. "Feels like she reads my thoughts," Harris said on his first flight back, but Brooks wasn't celebrating. Headquarters had reassigned him to Australia indefinitely, barred from speaking about the modification. He fixed trucks now, not fighters. His name wasn't mentioned in reports. There were no medals, no recognition, just silence. Still, he didn't complain. Every telegram reporting no losses meant more to him than any commendation. Yet something inside him ached. The thing he built to save lives had become another secret in a war full of them. In Tokyo, meanwhile, intercepted intelligence confirmed what Japanese analysts already feared: the P-38's performance had changed again. Zeros were now being outturned, something once unthinkable. Engineers called emergency meetings. Some insisted America had developed a new aircraft. Others, a new control system. None guessed the truth, that the game had shifted because of one mechanic, one coil of wire, and one idea no one believed would work. Far across the Pacific, Brooks looked at a grounded Lightning and said quietly, "Not bad for something they called stupid." By August 1943, pilots across the Pacific were whispering about a mystery mechanic who'd made the P-38 Lightning fly like a zero. No one knew his name, but every squadron had heard the rumor: a field fix so simple, it broke the laws of physics. In briefing tents and mess halls, they called it the wire trick. Some swore it came from Lockheed's top engineers. Others claimed it was stolen from German blueprints. Only a few men in uniform knew the truth, that it came from a single grease-stained hangar and a sergeant with dirty hands. The modification spread faster than official reports. Squadrons in New Guinea, the Philippines, and even the Aleutians began asking for the Brooks adjustment. Mechanics copied it by word of mouth, no diagrams, no paperwork. Just a loop of wire and instinct. It worked every time. Japanese pilots began calling the Lightning the new devil. Its twin tails haunted them in their sleep. The aircraft they once mocked for being clumsy now outturned them, outclimbed them, and tore through formations with terrifying precision. In Tokyo, intelligence officers collected fragments of wreckage from downed P-38s. They studied every cable, every control rod, every bolt. Nothing made sense. "The design is unchanged," one engineer wrote in frustration. Yet the behavior is impossible. Meanwhile, in Australia, Brooks read those same reports in intercepted intelligence summaries. He smiled but said nothing. The men in Washington had erased his name from the files, replacing it with a project number, but among the pilots, his legend grew. They said there was a man who could make a plane obey its pilot's thoughts, and though few would ever meet him, every time their P-38 responded faster than fear, they whispered, "Thanks, Brooks." September 1943. The Pacific sky shimmered with sunlight, broken only by the distant hum of engines. The mission was simple: escort bombers toward Bougainville, but everyone knew what was waiting above the clouds. Zeros, 12 P-38s flew in formation, their polished metal flashing like silver knives. Every one of them carried the Brooks wire mod, now standard issue. For the first time in the war, the pilots weren't dreading an encounter, they were ready for it. The Zeros struck fast, diving out of the sun in perfect formation. It was a textbook ambush, the kind that once tore American squadrons apart. But this time, the dance was different. Lieutenant Harris broke hard left, and the Lightning rolled into a blistering turn that would have been suicide months earlier. The Zero chasing him overshot, its pilot too stunned to react before traces slashed across his wing. The Japanese formation broke apart instantly. Across the radio came Harris's voice, calm and certain, "They can't turn inside us anymore." In minutes, the air became chaos, smoke trails, fireballs, and the sound of victory. When the surviving Zeros fled toward the sea, only 4 remained. The Americans hadn't lost a single plane. Down on the carrier decks and airfields, word spread like wildfire. Mechanics smiled. Pilots laughed. Even commanders shook their heads in disbelief. The unstoppable had been stopped. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Zero no longer ruled the Pacific. Back in Australia, Brooks received the after-action report in a sealed envelope. He read every line twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. He didn't celebrate. He just whispered to himself, "Guess the wire worked after all." By October 1943, the name Brooks had vanished from every report, every file, every official memo. The U.S. Army Air Forces called his work a classified control enhancement, and nothing more. On paper, it didn't even belong to him anymore, yet in the Pacific, his legend grew. Pilots spoke of a ghost mechanic, a man who had made the P-38 Lightning dance. They said he never slept, never spoke, and only touched planes that were shot full of holes. If he worked on your Lightning, you came home. If he didn't, you didn't. Walt read about himself in a military newsletter once. The story mentioned no names, just a field engineer whose modification improved aircraft survivability. He smiled faintly. That was him, erased, yet alive in rumor. Back at the Townsville base, life settled into routine. He trained younger mechanics, repaired bullet-riddled wings, and refused every promotion offered. To him, rank didn't matter, only the sound of engines that would start again tomorrow. Then one evening, a telegram arrived. It was from Lieutenant Harris, now a decorated ace, "Flew with the new boys today." They don't believe the stories. But every time the plane turns tighter, they thank the ghost who made it possible. Walt folded the paper slowly and tucked it into his pocket. He looked across the hangar where another Lightning waited for his hands. The war would end one day, but the stories would not. He whispered, almost amused, "A ghost, huh? That's fine by me." The engines roared outside, echoing like thunder over the runway, and somewhere out there, in the endless Pacific sky, his invention kept flying, unseen, uncredited, but immortal. When the war finally began to tilt in the Allies' favor, Brooks expected to fade back into obscurity. But his idea had already taken on a life of its own. Engineers from Lockheed and Wright Field continued experimenting with his wire tension principle, refining it into adjustable preloaded control systems. They didn't call it the Brooks trick anymore, they called it progress. By early 1944, the concept appeared in new aircraft prototypes. A generation of American fighters, the P-51H Mustang, the F-180 Shooting Star, all carried echoes of that same mechanic's instinct, controls that anticipated the pilot's motion, not resisted it. Brooks never saw the blueprints. He didn't need to. He could feel it every time a pilot wrote home saying, "The new Lightnings fly like dreams." One afternoon, a colonel approached him with a sealed envelope. Inside was a transfer offer, stateside duty, research assistance at Wright Field. Brooks read it once, then folded it shut. "I belong here," he said simply. Planes don't fix themselves. He stayed in Australia until war's end, training a new generation of mechanics. They called him Old Wire Hands. Few of them even knew the story, that the quiet man teaching them torque and tension had changed aviation history. When victory came, Brooks watched the sky fill with contrails and thought of the men who never made it back. The wire, the trick, the legend, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that his planes flew true, and somewhere, across oceans and time, engineers kept building on his idea, not knowing his name, but guided by his hands. August 1945, the war that had consumed the world was finally ending. Word reached Townsville in broken radio bursts, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and then silence. For the first time in years, the engine stopped. No sirens, no scramble calls, no planes limping home on one propeller. Walt Brooks stood alone in the hangar, surrounded by ghosts of machines he had kept alive. Rows of P-38s waited under dusty tarps, their wings reflecting the fading sunlight. Each one carried a story, a name painted on its nose, a bullet hole patched with his hands, a pilot who may or may not have come back. When the surrender became official, the base erupted in cheers. Men shouted, laughed, fired flares into the sky. Brooks smiled faintly but didn't join them. He just walked to the nearest Lightning, ran a hand along its cold metal, and whispered, "You did your job, girl. You brought them home." That night, he sat on a crate by the runway, watching the horizon glow red with sunset. He thought of Harris, who was still out there flying patrols near the Philippines. He thought of the hundreds of pilots who'd trusted the strange mechanic with the stupid wire. For all the noise and victory, a strange stillness filled him. The world had changed. The planes he loved would soon be scrapped, melted down, replaced by jets he would never touch. A lieutenant approached him quietly. "Sir, they're saying the Lightning's days are done. The new ones don't even have cables anymore, all hydraulics." Brooks nodded. "Good. Let the machines fly themselves now. We did our part." As the night deepened, he heard the last few engines fade into silence. The war was over, but the echo of his invention would never stop flying. In February 1946, Walt Brooks finally boarded a transport ship bound for San Francisco. The Pacific was calm, but the journey felt endless. Around him were men eager to go home, laughing, trading stories, planning futures that had once seemed impossible. Walt sat quietly on deck, hands still stained with oil that no amount of soap could wash away. When the ship reached port, the cheers were deafening. Brass bands played, families waved flags, and the skyline glittered in the afternoon light. But to Walt, it all felt distant, too bright, too fast. After years of jungle airfields and roaring engines, the silence of peace was almost unbearable. He found work at a small aircraft maintenance shop outside Los Angeles. Civilian planes now, sleek, polished, painted bright colors instead of camouflage. The mechanics were young and full of confidence. They didn't know the smell of burning oil or the weight of fixing a machine that carried someone's life. One afternoon, a new twin-engine plane taxied up for service, a post-war prototype built by Lockheed. Walt climbed the ladder, opened the control panel, and froze. Inside was a familiar sight, a tension coil, perfectly manufactured, gleaming under the light. He smiled to himself. So, you made it home too. The design was more refined, of course, lighter, adjustable, with precision engineering. But the heart of it was his idea. A wire to bridge the gap between man and machine. No one in the hangar knew his name. No one realized the quiet old sergeant tightening bolts beside them had changed the way aircraft responded to human touch. And Walt didn't need them to. He simply worked, whistling softly over the hum of the tools. The world had moved on, but somewhere in every cockpit, hidden beneath polished metal, his wire still connected pilot to plane, thought to motion, life to sky. By the 1950s, the world had already moved on from propellers to jet engines. The roar of turbines replaced the hum of pistons, and a new generation of pilots soared higher and faster than ever. To them, the war was history, distant, simplified, heroic, but buried deep in the archives of Wright Field. Engineers studying early control systems kept finding the same technical note: Control Enhancement No. 47A, 1943, Pacific Theater, no author. No signature. Just a schematic, a short description, and one line at the bottom: Field applied wire tension mod improved pilot responsiveness by 30%. One young engineer, curious about the cryptic entry, began searching through old maintenance reports. After weeks of digging, he found it, a name scribbled in faded pencil on a fuel log: Sergeant W. Brooks. He wrote a letter to his supervisor. Whoever this Brooks was, he discovered something fundamental. Pre-tension systems now used in nearly every aircraft owe their origin to his field modification. But the world wasn't listening. The Cold War had begun, and the race to the jet age left no room for old heroes. Meanwhile, in California, Walt Brooks lived quietly in a rented apartment near the coast. He still worked with engines, now cars instead of planes. His neighbors knew him as the guy who fixes anything. Sometimes, he'd watch contrails cross the sky and smile, knowing his idea was still up there somewhere. Once, a newspaper ran a story about unsung wartime innovators. A friend showed it to him and joked, "They should have put you in here." Walt only chuckled. "Nah," he said, "the planes are flying, that's all that matters." History had forgotten him, but every pilot who felt their aircraft move exactly when they did was still flying with a piece of him, a thin wire of genius stretched across time. The years slipped by quietly. By the 1960s, Walt Brooks had retired to a small house near the Mojave Desert, not far from the airfields where the new supersonic jets trained. Every morning, he'd sit on his porch with a cup of coffee and watch contrails cut the sky, white scars tracing dreams he once helped shape. He never spoke of the war. Neighbors knew him only as Mr. Brooks, the old mechanic. Sometimes children brought him broken bicycles or radios, and he fixed them with the same calm precision that once saved pilots' lives. In 1972, an aviation historian named Dr. Alan Reeves was researching control systems when he found a faded maintenance report stamped "Confidential, 1943." It mentioned the now famous Control Enhancement No. 47A. At the bottom was a name, barely legible: Sergeant Walter Brooks. Reeves tracked him down. Walt, gray-haired and gentle-eyed, opened the door wearing a grease-stained shirt. When the historian explained why he'd come, Walt just smiled. "I figured someone would find me eventually," he said. The following year, an article appeared in Aviation Mechanics Quarterly, "The Forgotten Hand Behind the Lightning." It credited Sergeant Walter Brooks as the man whose simple wire modification had forever changed aircraft control response. Walt read it once, folded it neatly, and placed it inside an old toolbox. He didn't need the applause. He'd had his reward 29 years earlier, when the first Lightning came home intact. He passed away quietly in 1975. At his funeral, 2 veterans from the Pacific placed a single spool of piano wire beside his casket. No speeches, no flags, just that wire, gleaming in the morning sun. Today, his invention lives on, in every aircraft that responds to a pilot's slightest touch. A silent thread between man and machine. The war ended long ago, but the wire never broke.